Announcement. First of all, thank you for being here. I want to highlight briefly that we have an exciting talk for today. And then our next seminar, for people who really want to plan ahead, should be in your calendars anyway, but let me know if that's not the case. But on October 6th, we're delighted that Nancy Brady is going to be speaking about her new R01 funded work on children with autism at risk for remaining non-speaking. So that's on October 6th at the same time. And as I mentioned, it'll be on, actually that one will be a hybrid, and it'll be in person in Dole 1031, as well as on Zoom, if that's easier for people. So we're looking forward to that. For today, I want to get us started by welcoming Brad Linnenkamp and thanking him for joining us for this seminar. So hopefully everybody knows Brad, but if you do not, Brad is an assistant researcher in the University of Kansas Center for Excellence in Developmental Disabilities. Brad has been part of multiple nationally funded research projects focusing on supported decision-making, self-determination, and community engagement for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. Before coming over to KU and the UCED, Brad worked for the Self-Advocate Coalition of Kansas for 20 years. He also currently sits on many state and national committees, including the DisabilityRights Center of Kansas, Employment First Commission, and the Self-Advocate Resource and Technical Assistance Center National Advisory Board. In 1990, actually, this is slightly more prestigious than the KCART Research Seminar Series, but he actually received the Achievement Against the Odds Award from President Bush for overcoming obstacles in his life and assisting others to achieve independence. So we are delighted that Brad is able to join us here today and present on disability, self-determination, and inclusive research. And Carrie Sjogren is the director of the UCED, and she also is going to be helping with this particular presentation, working the slides, and helping with the Q&A. We'll do the Q&A as usual at the end of the presentation for the last 10-15 minutes, and people can feel free to raise your hand, your virtual hand, and then unmute. We'll try to do it in a structured way and call on you, and then you can unmute and ask your question, or you're also welcome to drop your questions into the chat, and Carrie will be fielding those and asking them aloud for Brad. With that said, welcome, Brad. Thank you for doing it, and thank you, Carrie, for joining as well.
Thanks, Matt. Thanks for the introduction. And the one thing I do want to say, though, is that I am a person with a disability. I have cerebral palsy, and I use my experiences here at KU and throughout my life to help others, not only with developmental disabilities, but to educate everyone that people with disabilities like myself and others have the ability to do the type of work that not only I'm doing, but other people here at the university and around the country as well, because I'm also involved with, like Matt said, many other groups related to disability related issues. Go ahead, Gary. One thing I wanted to, I am also a member of the hold on just a second, consumer advisory panel for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities. And this is a picture, one of the most recent pictures of the group. And we actually meet quarterly to talk about, we bring people with all types of disabilities to the table to talk about not only what the research here at the university is and talking about the different projects that we work on, but we also talk to different people with different disabilities about what they think that we should also work on as well. And at the bottom there, you can see the quote, "Nothing about us without us." And that's a long time quote from disability advocates for many years, that if you're gonna bring people to the table to talk about issues related to disability, you better make sure that the people that it affects their lives are also at the table to discuss what's important to them. Next slide. Gary, can I have you take a couple of those per minute?
Yeah, sure, Brad. I can jump in for a sec if you want me to, and then turn it over to you.
Yeah, that's fine. Go right ahead.
So the model that Brad really supports us to use at KUCDD and that we're advancing in our work is inclusive research, building on this idea of nothing about us without us. There's other names, you see them on the screen. And Brad, do you want to talk a little bit about how inclusive research can really change that dynamic between researchers and the people that are part of the research?
Yes, I could do that. One of the projects that I have done here in the last couple of years, we did a big project on the effects of COVID-19 and people with disabilities. We had an event around the time of the ADA celebration. It was the 31-year celebration. It was co-hosted by the Self-Advocate Coalition of Kansas. Actually, take that back. They sponsored the event, and many things were put together around having people there to not only get your shots and different activities around COVID-19, but my part of the project was the fact that I did some research about talking to advocates about what was their experiences when dealing with COVID-19, and what were their fears, how did they struggle during COVID-19? Was it the isolation? Was it not being around people enough? These are some of the questions that people would bring to the table when I was interviewing. Wrote some interview questions, and we ended up interviewing about 21 people in about a 3-hour period during the event. So we got a lot of interest, and we got a lot of great feedback on the effect of COVID-19 in many different ways. We had people talking about employment issues, how they weren't able to go to work. We talked about health issues as well, not being able to get the vaccines at the time, because right about the time that we did this event, if I'm correct, that was the time that the first round of vaccines were starting to become available. So, and so there was so many different aspects of the interviews that I had that it was very comprehensive. And after the interviews, I went back and I looked at the videos, and I picked out some of the most important comments that were made by people. And if anybody wants to go and look at the videos later, they are on the KUCDD website. And I I thought it was just a really great event, and I think it was. The other piece that I wanted to say too about this is that if I didn't have the types of supports that I had to do this, it would have been a lot harder, but this is a different topic for me personally and with others as well, is that if the supports are provided to do the work, it can get done. So.
Yeah, and I'll jump back in and just say that what Brad, one of the things that he was really emphasizing there is that when we're really talking about inclusive research, it's inclusive across all phases of the research process. So Brad, I'm going to go on to the next slide that has our graphic that shows thinking through how we break down these phases. All too often, research has sometimes used a more tokenistic approach. Maybe people are asked some questions at the idea generation phase or come in at the dissemination phase, but inclusive research finds those entry points for collaboration between researchers with different lived experience at all stages of the process. And I want to say too, Brad, and then I'm going to ask you to hit on a few more things around these different areas that we often talk, Brad, sometimes when Brad gets introduced, is introduced as the researcher with a disability, and he is, and that's part of his identity. But we want to make sure that we're not drawing these artificial distinctions. Brad contributes in an equal way to people with different training. He brings different background and different experiences. So the idea is really that we're all researchers, all bringing unique opportunities, but that we all need to really figure out how to support each other in communicating and effectively identifying these areas. So Brad, you talked a little bit about some of your involvement in the COVID-19 project, and Brad will undersell himself, so I'll upsell him. He's one of the first, co-principal investigators and investigators on multiple funded grant projects with a developmental disability at KU. So we could talk about lots of those and can answer questions, but we were going to talk a little bit more about the COVID project today. So Brad, do you want to share anything about what and why it was so important to bring your lived experience to generating some of those ideas?
I think one of the biggest things that I've learned since I've started doing more and more research is that, and I've said this before, that if you're going to do the research, you better have people that actually live that specific research, daily life experiences and things like that, because if you don't include people with intellectual or any other disability, the research in my mind will not be as true as it could possibly be when you're doing the research. So and then also I've also had to learn during doing research is that, and I mentioned this just a minute ago, but in a different way, one of the difficulties that I had when I first started doing research was the fact that I was, and I'll admit it, I was getting a little frustrated trying to figure out how to process the information to make it relevant to not only the people that we were working for, but also making it so that I can understand the research itself and then to be able to share it with other people and other advocates and other researchers along the way. So, but I've gotten better at it over the last year or two, and it's become easier and easier. And the one thing that I do like to say about doing research is you can do research one way, but then you realize, hey, there might be a different way to look at the research after you do it for a while. So that's something that I've had to learn as I do more and more of the research.
Hey, Brad, can I share something just as someone who you partnered with on this research?
Sure, go right ahead, Evan.
Because just thinking about your contributions to the COVID-19 project in general, I just wanted to highlight a couple of areas that I learned a lot because you had such an active role throughout the process.
Yeah.
Like around idea generation, I mean, we were all living through COVID-19 at the time. We were all, constantly watching the news and had, this real idea of how it affected both us and kind of nationally how it affected people. So, when we were developing, ideas for this research and even, the research questions and stuff, I felt like I had a handle on questions to ask. And then you were like, no. You're not really getting it. Like, I don't have the support I need in the morning because I don't know if the person that's walking into my door is going to give me COVID.
Yep.
And that example made it so real why we needed to hear more experiences from self-advocates and just that expertise that you brought right there from the beginning.
Yep.
I think the other thing that I would mention was around dissemination, because we think, okay, I mean, you outlined beautifully, I think, the qualitative method that we use there to conduct the research. And then it came down to figure out, okay, how do we get the news out about this? So we, automatically default to writing a paper about it because that's what we're trained to do. And you brought up again, like, well, that's great, but that's not going to reach the people that we're really trying to impact with this. So then that, brought up the idea of the videos, and then we had to go back to think about how we were really collecting that data. So I just a couple of examples of how you really impacted that work.
So and thanks, Evan. That's one of the things that as we go along and do more research, we have to find different ways to get the information out. Because there are people as well with different types of disabilities. I think of autism. I think of others. Sorry, they're in my head, but they're not coming out. But yeah, just having to find different ways to get the information out to the people that really need to know about it. So,
yeah, and I think that was Evan Dean. Evan's associate director at KUCDD and works really closely with Brad and I and leads several of the projects that we're involved in. And yeah, I think Brad really pushed us, especially with some of this COVID-19 work, to make sure we're getting papers out to kind of share the impacts, to share reasons, especially we got some funding around kind of vaccine access and how to promote it. But then also to go that next step and create videos that I think are different. Like Evan and I would both say, even what we communicated through the videos that we've now made available, communicated in different ways that emerged from that collaborative work. I'm not sure if Brad would have just come in on the back end, not that he wouldn't have had great ideas and pushed us to think about those things, but it was that process throughout all of our research that really let that evolve in a very different way. And I also want to say, Brad, I appreciate you always being open to learning the jargon and the other things and coming into the meetings. But I also want to say that one of the things that Brad, and our other team members with lived experience always push us to do is to ask that question, whatever project it is. We use an awful lot of jargon. And sometimes there is very technical language that's important, but how can we approach that differently? And irrespective of disability, if there's a lot of technical jargon, why don't we have a handout that details those things for anyone that's joining a team? How do we streamline what we're talking about? How do we build meetings and supports and push outside of boundaries? We don't always have to have PowerPoints. We can have conversations. We can do a lot of other things.
So and that's the best thing that I've figured with working is that one way of presenting may work in one area, but then again, I've also figured out the types of presentations that I'm really good at. And this is an example of one of them right now, is just by having people ask me questions and then let me explain or expound upon it a bit, and going that route is good as well. So, yep. All right, next slide, I think.
Yeah.
See if it's gonna go. Let me get back to, okay. Yep, I did. There are many systematic barriers to inclusive research. For example, there's a lack of opportunities for training opportunities, career pathways, fair compensation for people with disabilities, respect of lived experiences, and focuses on intersectionality, such as gender, race, class, and etc. So, as you can tell, there are just different ways to go about looking at the research. And the hardest part about not only working with the research is how do we go about communicating it to people that may not do this sort of work on an everyday basis. Like, for example, the advocates that I talked about, focusing on just finding ways to include them in the research at the level that they're most comfortable with as well, because there are certain things that we do that people may not be as comfortable with, but we gotta find the best way to not only involve them in the research, but also make the research understandable for everyone. So.
And I can just jump in, Brad, and say, you know, one of the things that we talk a lot about are some of these, you know, systemic barriers. I mean, the research enterprise is set up in a certain way to value certain things and, you know, value certain degrees, and not that those aren't important, but it doesn't create equitable structures. Like Brad and I can answer questions and talk to you about even barriers that we faced when we were recruiting Brad to come to KUCDD and really wanted him, related to accessibility and how long it took to get things ready for Brad to be able to fully access our facilities on campus. And we still haven't been able to fully address issues of equity in pay and salary and experience, because we value certain things and certain ways of knowing. We have to get special permissions based on degrees and participation in projects. And these things have to change to truly let us move towards more inclusive research.
So, as always, as we're doing research, I keep thinking, now that you said that, Carrie, I keep thinking that there's always going to be barriers along the way. We just have to figure out when we come up against them, okay, what do we do now to get through those barriers and continue doing the work? So, so.
All right, Brad's laughing at my dog Poppy, who hears him and must want to just comment on how awesome he's doing with his presentation. You know, the only other thing I'll say too, and this is something that Brad and Evan and I and others really want to target in our ongoing work is, you know, Brad kind of mentioned we hired him in this job. We knew we really wanted to support this, but he just started jumping into meetings and other activities we were doing. From his self-advocacy background, he had much richer experience than many of us in some of these areas, but yet there wasn't kind of information that we could easily and accessibly share on the steps of that research process. So what is idea generation? What is methods development? You know, many people that go through, you know, advanced training, we go through long periods of training on this. So how can we create information where we can really build knowledge of this research process, create career pathways so that we really are creating kind of a pipeline of researchers with training, background, and experience that leverages their lived experience to continue to support these areas.
So, I think we can move on to the next one, I think. Yep. So, some of the things that need to be done are like, and we've talked about this already, but this is just written in a different way. Making sure that we engage people with intellectual and developmental disabilities at all levels of the research, defining authentic roles aligned with everyone's need, their individual and their needs, and then creating pathways for training and to develop their career development. And also the big thing is creating space for people with intellectual and developmental disabilities to pursue career research if they want to pursue research and careers of their choosing. And then the biggest one that is always there is advocating for systematic change, which when you're advocating, you're constantly making changes along the way. It doesn't stay pat. It doesn't, you have to always, depending on who your audience is, when you're talking to people and others, you always have to be able to adjust your presentations, your ways of thinking about the research and things like that. So I think, was this the one, Gary, where you were gonna ask me questions, or did you want me to tell one of my stories?
Well, I think it'd be great if you told one of your stories and then I can ask you any of the other questions that we identified.
Okay, so one of my favorite things that I do is that I live on my own, and I do what's called supported decision making, and that is a different way of looking about how you take control of your life. And I have a group of people that are there to support me. Every day there's certain things that I need support on, and I also like to say that everybody in their own way needs support. I know we didn't focus on that as much today when we were talking about COVID, but when Carrie asked me about the effects of what it looked like when I have support come in every day, that helped to bring this other idea up, is that in my space, I have a group of people that I rely on to run things by on a daily basis. Maybe not even a daily basis, but just things that you learn about how to not only live your life, but how do you go about sharing not only what goes on in your life, but how do you use those stories in your research. And I think I've found ways to not only use my lived experience, but to also use those issues within the research itself. And it's constantly changing every day, because as we get older, circumstances change. So I'm sure as we go along and we start researching other areas in regards to people with intellectual and developmental disabilities, we will also try to get those experiences from those people as well. So.
And Brad, I'm actually going to stop sharing the screen so that everyone can maybe see each other a little better. And I'll follow up just really quickly. So you shared a little bit about supported decision-making, which is actually another area that you've been involved in a lot of research around. We've been very fortunate to have several projects to really look at how to develop supports to make supported decision-making a reality, how to navigate that in health systems and legal systems and employment. And do you want to maybe share a little bit more about how some of your own experiences with supported decision-making impacted the research?
I think one of the things about supported decision-making was not only as we were doing the research, we didn't, well, take that back. We had to really think about not only how do we include people with disabilities within the research, but it also was the area of getting people's voices heard, finding out what their experiences are. And I also found out along the way that there are a lot of people like myself and others that don't even have disabilities that actually use supported decision-making themselves. So it's like, what do we do to enhance that idea? Support, I'm going to go back just a little, but supported decision-making is a good replacement for guardianship. Guardianship is all or nothing in the state of Kansas, and a lot of other states are along the way, where with guardianship, if you're under a guardianship order from a judge or otherwise, guardianship will take away your rights completely, where under supported decision-making, you still have the right to do anything you want. Your rights aren't taken away, and it's not, guardianship is decided by others. Somebody else may be assigned as your guardianship, and it might not as your guardian, and it might not be somebody that's related to you, which is not always a good thing. But as we go along more and more with more research, and we learn more about supported decision making and how do we get a law in Kansas passed, which has been an issue over the last couple of years. We've run into a couple roadblocks to get an actual law on the books for the state of Kansas. But I also want to say too that there doesn't have to be a law for people to use the principles of supported decision making either. I use it in my own way, and other people may have other areas that they need support in. And that's the good thing about supported decision making, is because of it could change over time as you get older, and your supports may look a little different, but it's a great option to have for everyone.
Thanks, Brad. I think I have one or two more questions for you, but I want to invite everyone else to be thinking about questions, and you're welcome to either put them in the chat or people can unmute and ask questions to a relatively small group. But Brad, before we turn it over to everyone else, one of the other questions we talked about was how, for you to comment a little bit on how we as a field of researchers can get more self-advocates involved in research and into positions like yours.
One of the best ways that I can think of, and we've slowly but surely, we've started with some of the projects that we have. I've been working with a couple of advocates here in Lawrence on a specific project that we're doing. But I think one of the best ways to try and get advocates interested in maybe helping with more research or getting into positions like mine is you just need to ask people. It's finding the right questions to ask people to see if they're interested, and to see the other piece to that question too is the fact is if you do want to do the research, what sort of supports do you need to be able to do your best within the work that we do, and to feel like you're a part of the research and that you're doing the research. And the one thing I keep thinking is, and it just hit me, is sometimes I don't always like to be the one that's researched. It's like the opposite. I'd rather be doing the research instead of being a part of the research.
Thanks, Brad. I think that's a very fair request, to have the opportunity to do the research as well as be as part of the research. Are there questions from anyone? Again, feel free to, oh yeah, go ahead, Matt.
Well, first of all, thanks, Carrie, and thank you especially to Brad for this presentation. I think it's been very informative and helpful, and frankly, you're talking through ideas that weren't back in the day when I was going through training. I guess we're always training, but when I was formally in training as like a graduate student, I mean, this was not part of the discussion, you know, to be honest. And I think it's become, you know, in a good way, it's become much more prevalent in terms of discussions about how people develop, generate, disseminate research. And so that's a good thing. I think one of the challenges, though, is from my perspective, is I have colleagues that study autism, say, and they have, you know, members of their team that identify as autistic, and that's been great. I've never had an autistic individual apply for a position in my lab, and I've never had an autistic individual apply to be a doctoral candidate in my lab, and I would welcome that, but I would venture to say that that's probably something about what I'm doing and how I'm approaching it. And so I am curious, and this is really to Brad primarily, but I'd also invite Carrie or Evan to hop in as well, or others who have thoughts about this, but I'm not sure how to execute what I think is a very important idea.
Let's see. Made me think for a second, but
and I've been thinking about it for years too, Brad, just to be clear. Like, I'm sure there's not an easy answer. This is more, you know, in regards to like your experience and then you said as a team who are doing this skillfully and successfully. For those of us who are rookies or feeling like rookies and not doing it well, you know, what have been some of the helpful approaches in your view?
I think one of the things that's been helpful for me to transition to, and I mentioned this earlier, is not only support that I've received and knowing what I can and can't do within the work itself, but it's also knowing that I'm in a place where, and this could be true of other people as well, is that their ideas and their insights are valued, and that and Carrie mentioned it earlier. I hate the word, but I don't feel I'm not a token. I'm not here. And if I felt that category that I was, because I know what it feels like to be the token person with a disability when I was younger. That doesn't come across at all. People, if you feel like you're comfortable and you feel like an equal when you're doing the work, that's the best feeling in the world. And I mentioned too, that when I'm working, I really don't, and tell me if I'm wrong, guys, but I think I come across as I don't identify first as a person with a disability. I'm just a person with a disability. And that's also goes back to the phrase that was earlier said, nothing about us without us. So I've tried over my career and everything that I do that if you feel like your ideas are accepted and that you are competent to do the work, and as long as you have those supports, I know I go back to that all the time, but it's been key in what I've been able to do, that anybody with a disability can do whatever they are not only comfortable doing, but they feel like they have the ability to contribute within the research.
And I might ask, Brad, I was sitting here trying to think about this. I can't even remember how long I've known you. It's probably been longer than I like to admit, to be honest, but it was a long-standing process, right, of relationship building, collaboration, and doing other projects together before you transitioned to this role. This was not one of those, we just had a position and you decided to apply. I think, especially as some of your colleagues at SAC may say, we stole Brad because we did a lot of things with him. And then we're like, oh, would you like to come do this? And he's like, maybe I'll think about it. And we're like, let's create the position and figure out how to make it work. But I wonder if you want to say anything too, because I think there's something to be said for the relationship and the community building and the building of the trust to address some of these inequities. I mean, Brad took a risk. He could have come into an environment that would have been totally tokenistic because they exist out there very frequently. So Brad, what do you think about that?
And it's like I said, I go back to this other question too. This work isn't for everyone. And regardless of whether you have a disability or not, but going back to my advocacy side of the days too, when I was doing that, and I mentioned this within one of their research projects, and one of the questions back then, I don't know where it fits. As an advocate, I didn't really pay attention to the research. I knew there was research on different projects for people with disabilities and all this other thing, all the other things that go with that. But then I also realized that it was time for a change as well, because I felt like with my previous job, and I still love the relationship that I still have with SAC in regards to all the different projects that we work on together. But me personally, I was ready for a change, and I don't want to say that every person with a disability would want to do this work. It's just up to them. And I really felt like having the opportunity not only to come in and just I felt like I was hitting the ground running right off the bat because I knew the first couple things that I would have to do, and we did this, was work on the accessibility part of me being in the office. And then the other piece to that too, and I haven't mentioned that as well, was during COVID, it wasn't feasible for me to come into the office every day to work. And so like a lot of us, not only here, but around other areas around KU, we had to adjust to COVID and working from home. So I've got the same setup that I do here at my office with my computer and my table, my desk. I've got the same setup at home to where I can work at home if need be. And so it's just those accommodations, and being a researcher too, just made me think of something else, is that just having the ability to communicate not only with others, but I've also figured out that when I'm out in the community, I have a huge ability to just interact with people and find out what's going on, not only with them, but I take that experience of when I'm meeting people out in the community to not only educate them, which is constant, about disability, but it also helps me think of other ideas that I might be able to bring to the research. I don't know if that was exactly what you wanted, but that's what I
was just going to add in to Carrie's point, and to say to Matt, like I feel your pain. When we posted Brad's position, we had one applicant. So it, yeah. So you know, I agree with Carrie. It was a lot of networking and a lot of working with self-advocates over years. And it was really through a conversation with Sean Swindler, who's on the call too, that who knows a lot of self-advocates, to say, like, I think I know somebody who's looking for a change, to kind of have those conversations. So I'd say, as I reflect on it, it was the same process we would use to invite really good faculty to the university, kind of just all through those networks that we, that we know and utilize. It was just a different network for this position. I also, oh, sorry, go ahead.
No, go ahead, Evan.
I was gonna, Catherine had a question in the chat. I was gonna switch topics, but go ahead, Carrie.
I was just going to say, and I want to be cognizant of time, Matt. I don't know when you need to, I couldn't remember if this ended before or right on the hour, but I was going to say too, in relation to that you do tend to, once you get going with this, and I've talked about this with others that are really trying to build inclusive research teams, it can keep growing and expanding because you're able to build that culture and that reputation for doing those things. Since we kind of were first able to recruit and get Brad on board, we've now been able to recruit other people with lived experience across a variety of different project activities and expertise. So for me, it's a growth process, and it's really building this over time. I think sometimes it's finding the person that's willing to kind of take that leap with you and figure it out initially. And so Brad was willing to do that with us, which we'll forever be grateful for.
That sounds great. And I hear what you're saying, Evan, because that's especially like that. I was thinking about this in terms of every time we're hiring or recruiting, we often, I shouldn't say every time, but often we're going through different networks of collaborators or friends in the field that we know. But I'm also thinking about this, and I'll just say this as opposed to, because I want to get to Catherine's question. I know that people have similar questions or distinct questions, but we're also talking about, building or developing, and supporting individuals in training to do this work, right? It takes all of us a long time to learn how to do this work. And so I think if we go, through networks that we know and have established, to me, that's a little bit harder because, or this, this type of role is harder because we're trying to help people maybe who aren't in in a research domain right now, right? Or doing distinct work and want to maybe have ideas about this, but aren't attending, you know, a meeting that we're at yet. So anyway, just a thought, but I'll end it there. I'll end my question there. We are going to the hour. And so I think, yeah, addressing Carrie's question would be great. Just since I'm already talking, I'll just say it out loud. It's in the chat. Although, Catherine, did you want to unmute and ask or no? Because I saw you go on mute.
No, I was just unmuting to prepare to respond.
Yeah, so Catherine had asked, you know, about methods for finding support, places for funding to make sure that there's fair compensation here. You know, especially early on, maybe in the individual's research career. I think kind of related to that too. Somebody else who's here was sending me a note in the chat, just thinking through this, like say from an NIH perspective, right? Like, so, you know, how do you identify someone who doesn't yet have their PhD, but they're serving in a researcher role? How does that get handled? Some of that is just like, you know, moving it away from convention, right? But also you have maybe reviewers who are saying, yeah, I'm not used to seeing this. It's, you know, they need somebody who's had 6 publications in this role. So first author. Yeah.
Yeah, and I'll just say it can definitely, this goes back to the systemic kind of barriers and the advocacy that has to happen to make these things. I will say I think of it as almost there's almost 3 separate issues, kind of funders and their willingness to allow this. For example, and Brad, you can feel free to jump in, but we've had to file paperwork to have Brad eligible to be a key personnel and an investigator on projects, which that was not the default at KU, but I was able to justify Brad's skill set, the resources that he brought, the things that he was going to contribute in those roles that others couldn't. And so he was awarded by, you know, the Office for Research, the ability to have that designation on our projects. And so getting that in place, and we've never had pushback. Brad's been on projects, and Evan can talk more to this, funded by the Administration on Community Living and other organizations. And we've never had pushback on that because Brad's kind of resume speaks for itself in terms of what he brings in terms of those lived experience and his contributions, but it has been building that over time. I think the second piece, and then Brad, I'll let you comment if you have anything to add, is though the equitable compensation is still another issue. The university has, you know, designated pay structures based on degrees, based on titles. And even though we're able to get Brad the ability to be on projects, the university and the titling system is still an issue there. So I'll be honest, that's still one of the battles that I think we need to continue to tackle. Anyone that wants to join me in continued advocacy on this issue, feel free, is that recognizing that there might be roles that people can play that should be compensated in ways that aren't always based on our old hierarchies of certain types of degrees, especially based on what they're contributing.
That's right, yeah. So, yeah, I agree, Carrie, and I don't know if I could add any more to that, but it's something that has to be looked at in every situation whenever you're bringing new people on board and trying to figure out where do they fit within the hierarchy and the system that's already been established. So I agree.
Yeah, thanks. So it sounds like that when you are starting to partner with people with lived experience, one of the most important things you can do is start building up a resume and a track record of the things that they're doing so that you have that documentation when you are trying to get them to be more involved.
Right. Yep.
Thanks, guys.
Yeah, I'll just follow up on that too. We have some projects where we're funding people through stipends to focus, so to, you know, work on different aspects of the project, just kind of start to build that resume also. So as another way to approach it. I think since we've been working with Brad and have a much better idea of kind of the qualifications and experiences that we're really looking for when we're hiring people with lived experience, that now we kind of have a list that we're kind of involving people as we can through different parts of different projects to kind of start to build that pipeline. So.
And that only helps. We talked about the fact that whenever I came over from SAC, everybody thought I was being stolen. But the idea is now is in the future, when we're trying to find other advocates, we have a way of going about finding people. And it may not be the way that I was able to come on board, but everybody can contribute. And I found that everybody in their own way, the advocates that we do have on different projects have contributed in their own way within what they're able to do, and their abilities have come through very well. Because I also think about the project for the COVID-19, the project that we had for, it was Philip Magruder, who works at SAC, was the lead. He put together the event for the Ark of Douglas County, and he did a great job. So, and he's a person with autism as well, and that was right around the 31st anniversary of the ADA. So everybody has their own abilities, and you just have to find them for each individual.
Yeah, and Brad, we're going to run out of time, but there is a question, two good questions from Nancy and Cassie in the chat, and we're always happy to talk with you after, because I know Brad will have some opinions on these. But really quickly, Nancy was asking about kids and doing research with kids, and often asking family members to be involved. But when and how can you get kids involved, or what could that look like?
One of the things that I do, and this doesn't even have anything to do with the research stuff, but when I'm out in the community, you don't know how many times I get kids coming up and asking about my disability, and I educate them to the best of my ability, depending on their age group. And I think, and this goes back to people in school. It doesn't, we have to get the younger people started early, not only on the, especially on their advocacy skills, because I really didn't start becoming an advocate until I pretty much graduated high school. So that goes back to the education piece, and we're talking about transition and getting kids started earlier, and along the way you can find out their abilities as well, and that's the best way that I think of right after that.
Yeah. And Nancy, I just add too that, like, having, even if research is on kids, having Brad as a part of our research team and kids seeing him as a member of that team and kind of creating those opportunities, that's one way that we're trying to change some of that culture. And Matt, do we have time for one more question, or should we?
Yeah, I mean, I'm mindful that people may have to go at 5 o'clock, and we are at the hour, but I think the number of questions is reflective of how much interest there is in this topic. So I think if you could, I don't know whether you're going to go to Cassie's question, which is related, and I think we can do that, but if people need to hop off, we understand. Thank you for coming, regardless.
Yeah, and yeah, I'll just say, Rebecca, that's actually a great idea for how to think about building teams, equity and equitable opportunities and diversity supplements. People with disabilities can definitely be a part of those. And I know some teams that have done that. But Brad, really quickly, Cassie was asking about people that may not speak or may use different communication supports. And if you had any thoughts on how to engage them as part of research teams.
I have a perfect example of that now. We have we have a person that's been not only a part of the CAP, but in other aspects, and he uses a communication device to be a part of some of the meetings that we're involved in. So it's very important that if you do have somebody that has communication issues or ways that they communicate, that fortunately within our groups that we talk to, we give plenty of time for them to be a part of it. And that it just takes a little bit more time to include them, but we really need to make sure that we do.
Well, with that said, we are at time, but I think you can see if you're not looking in the chat, Brad, you should know there were a lot of thank yous and appreciation for this talk. I think this was helpful and informative for all of us and really an important topic. So we appreciate your time in doing this. And we also appreciate, Carrie, you being here to be part of the conversation as well. So thank you for that. Thank you everyone for joining. As I mentioned before, Dr. Brady will be speaking in 2 weeks at our next presentation on October 6th. So I'll look forward to seeing you there. Please get the word out. We love it when our audience gets bigger. So please share with colleagues, students, and the like. So thanks so much, Brad and Carrie, again. Good seeing everyone. Take care.
Thank you.